All right, well, we are so glad that you are back at Mosaic today. I was out last week. Jeremy did a great job holding down the fort and continuing to teach us through the book of Philippians, but I want to say it's really good to be back with you today. If you're just joining us, we are in the book of Philippians where Paul is spending a lot of time talking to us about the subject of joy. Now, I want you to keep this in mind, okay? The book of Philippians, it is one of the shorter books of the entire New Testament. It's only 4 chapters. But in those 4 chapters, the Apostle Paul, he uses the word joy or rejoice 14 different times. And I'm going to tell you right now, that right there is why I love this book. But because I know in my life, I am looking for joy. I know that most people in the world, that they are looking for joy. People just want to be happy in life. And what Paul is doing in this book is he is showing us the true path to a life of true joy. Now, I want you to know this. Paul is not like most people. When you listen to most people in the world who are telling you how you can be happy and how you can have more joy in your life, most of those people, they are telling you that because they are selling you something else. That they want you to buy their product. They want you to use their resort or do something for them. That is not the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul is talking about joy, but he doesn't want anything from you. He truly wants something for you. He wants you to experience what the Bible calls the joy of the Lord. He wants followers of Jesus to experience what Jesus talked about back in John chapter 10, this abundant life that Jesus came into the world to give. And yet what he knows about most people is that most people are not experiencing that kind of life. They're not experiencing that kind of joy. Instead, they're like a dog that's chasing its tail. Has anybody ever seen a dog like chasing its tail? Putting in all kinds of effort and energy, chasing it, but they're never catching it. And when Paul looks at his world, he sees people just like that they're always chasing something that they think will make them happy. They're chasing popularity, thinking, that'll make me happy. They're chasing success and money, thinking, that will make me happy. They're chasing pleasure, or they're chasing the perfect person that they can spend the rest of their life with, thinking that will make me happy. And they chase, but they never catch it. And so they never experience real joy. See, when Jesus was on the earth, he told his closest friends and followers that one of the reasons he came into the world is so that his followers could experience what he called the abundant life. And this is such an important distinction for you to understand. What Jesus was talking about in that passage was not a life of chasing, but it was a life of receiving. It was receiving a kind of joy that can only come from Jesus. Jesus wasn't talking about an experience that produces joy. He was talking about a relationship that produces joy. Paul knew this kind of joy in his own life that was growing out of his own relationship with Jesus. And even though Paul was writing this letter from a prison cell, he was talking about experiencing a kind of joy that most people in the world do not experience even on their best days. And that right there is the kind of joy that I'm hoping and I'm praying we will be able to grab a hold of as a result of this series. Now, today, Paul is going to share with us a piece of wisdom that is essential for anyone and everyone who wants more joy in their life. And so if you are content with your crusty, old, crabby self, then you don't have to listen for the rest of the night, okay? But if you are the kind of person who says, man, I could use a little bit more joy in my life, then I want you to listen in. And if the person sitting next to you has a look on their face that suggests they need more joy in their life, I want you to nudge them right now and say, you better listen up. Go ahead. Tell them right now if they need it. Like, come on, listen up, all right? Everybody ready? Here we go, all right? The big idea for today is simply this. In order to adjust your attitude, you must be willing to adjust your expectations. Some of you have probably heard people say that if you just lower your expectations, then you will never be disappointed in life. That is not what we are talking about today. But we are not trying to lead people to become more pessimistic. But it is really important that we all become realistic about what the Christian life really looks like. But because if we don't have realistic expectations, then we are setting ourselves up for a kind of disappointment in our relationship with God, and we will lose our joy. In fact, let me just ask you on a very surface level right now, how many of you have ever noticed that one of the great joy killers in life is unmet expectations? Has anyone ever discovered this? Maybe in your marriage, don't point, maybe, just at work, something like that. Like sometimes I'm sitting at a green light and I have an expectation. The expectation is that the car in front of me will move, right? But they don't always move because they're playing on their phone. And when that expectation isn't met, I lose a little bit of my joy, right? When you have an appointment, you have an expectation that the person you're meeting with will keep that appointment. And when they show up 20 minutes late, you lose a little bit of your joy, right? But when you go to a restaurant and you order a steak and you say, I want that steak medium rare, and then it comes out medium well and you feel like you're chewing on a piece of shoe leather, your expectation isn't met and you lose a little bit of your joy. Like when you go home after that nice steak dinner and you think you're going to get lucky with your wife and she says, man, I'm full, or I got a headache, right? You had an expectation, brother, and that expectation wasn't being met, and you lose a little bit of your joy. It's getting real at Mosaic right now, okay? A couple of months ago, I was down in D'Iberville. I was picking up some stuff, and when I'm in D'Iberville, I always have to stop at one of my favorite ice cream shops. It just kind of feel like God's telling me to go there. And so I was like, I'm going to go over to Bob's, okay? I love going to Bob's. I don't go there nearly as much as I would like because if I did, I'd probably weigh like 300 pounds, give or take a little bit. Like, I love this place. And so I pop in, haven't been to Bob's in a long time, like 2 or 3 days. And so I roll in there and I order my go-to, okay? Like, you only want to get one thing if you ever go to Bob's. It's called the Peanut Butter Mountain. In fact, I've got a picture of the Peanut Butter Mountain, okay? This is like a week's worth of calories in a cup, okay? Like, this thing is made of vanilla custard. It's got peanut butter sauce. It's got Reese peanut butter cups. It's got hot fudge sauce and obviously whipped cream. Now, they try to put a cherry on the top. Nobody wants fruit with their ice cream. Just cut it out. We're not trying to be healthy. That's disgusting, okay? And so anyway, I pay for my ice cream, and at Bob's, you go sit down at a table, and then they bring it out when it's ready. And so I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm kind of thinking, man, my life is kind of boring. I'm 47 now. I'm kind of thinking this might be the highlight of my day, okay? Like, I'm excited that they're bringing out my ice cream, and when they brought it out, I don't know who it was in the back, but they forgot to put in my hot fudge sauce. No hot fudge, no joy, okay? I've already paid for it. I've already tipped them for it, okay? And I didn't get any hot fudge sauce. And when my expectation wasn't met, as you can tell, obviously, I lost a little bit of my joy. Now, let me just ask you, how many of you have had some kind of experience like that at some point in your life? Yeah, almost all of us. Right? You have these experiences, but I want you to understand something. If something so small can steal my joy, then I'm never going to have any joy. And the same is true for you. If you go through life and these really small things can eat away at or even steal your joy, you will never have any joy. Because the truth is, in this 30-day window when I was visiting Bob's, not only did they forget my hot fudge, but I went to get my oil changed. And the place that did my oil change forgot to put my engine cover back on the engine. They never even called me, even though it was sitting in the back of their shop for 3 or 4 days. A few days later, I look at my dashboard and there's this little red flashing light that was not on the dashboard flashing at me before I got the oil change, but it was now flashing at me after I got the oil change. Then I hop on a plane and I'm going on a trip, and the flight gets delayed because of weather, and I end up stuck in Houston, lose a day of my trip, and had to spend $130 on a hotel room because the flight was delayed for weather-related issues. And so I'm frustrated about that. Then I get a package that I've ordered, and it doesn't come when Amazon said it was going to come, and so I'm ticked off about that. Then I try to log into my DirecTV account so I can watch the big game on my laptop, and for some reason it's not working, probably because my kids have maxed out my login devices and they're using it on every device they own. And then we had an event here at the church and the attendance wasn't everything that I wanted it to be. And then the kicker for my favorite football team misses a simple 43-yard field goal to beat the University of Georgia for the first time since 2016, okay? And I could go on and on and on and on, and so could you. But because all of life is about these moments where we are not having expectations that are met and we lose a little bit of our joy. In fact, I am certain that you could tell me story after story about unmet expectations that you have in your life. And my point is simply this: if I am going to lose my joy every time an expectation isn't met, then I'm never going to have any joy. And yet, sadly, that is the way a lot of people live their life. Life for them is just one disappointment after another, and it's a life where they experience little to no joy. And that's why I want you to understand that in order to adjust your attitude, you really need to start thinking about adjusting your expectations. You have to understand that life is not good or bad. It is always good and bad. It is a combination of both good things that are going on in your life and hundreds, if not thousands, of good things that are going on in your life. And the bad and the good, it's all happening at the exact same time. And so if you don't just adjust your expectations, then you will never be able to adjust your attitude. Pastor Matt Chandler once said that all frustration is birthed out of unmet expectations, and so is nearly every conflict. See, the reason that our lives are so full of frustration and the reason that our relationships are so full of conflict and there's such very little joy is because we have all of these expectations in life and of other people, and the expectations are simply not met. And let me point out to you that it is one thing when it's some company that lets you down. It's something else when it's a family member or a friend who lets you down. But it's something altogether different when it feels like God is the one who has let you down. And that is Paul's great concern for the Christians in Philippi. That they are going through some things that are very much like the things that Paul is going through in his life. And they feel maybe like God has somehow let them down. That their expectations of God were not being met. And it's not just that they're losing a little bit of their joy, but Paul's lingering concern may be that they're going to lose their faith. That maybe in the midst of all this unmet expectations that they get mad at God. That maybe they walk away from their relationship with God. And I see the same thing in the world today. It's like Christians are walking around with this sense of entitlement to things that, quite frankly, God never promised. And so we have all these expectations. But honestly, they are unrealistic expectations. And so I want you to listen today very carefully to what God promised so that you can have realistic expectations, fewer disappointments, and a lot more joy in your life. Philippians chapter 1, picking it up in verse 27, reading down to verse 30, Paul said this. He said, "Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in Him, but also to suffer for Him, since you were going through the same struggle you saw I had, and hear that I now still have. Now, I want you to catch this. Paul starts this entire section of his letter to the Philippians with two words. Whatever happens. You know what that means? That means that there are going to be some good things that are going to happen. And that means that there are also going to be some bad things that are going to happen. That you're going to go through life and you're going to catch some great breaks. And you're going to go through life and you're going to catch some really bad breaks. And so Paul says that whatever happens, I want you as followers of Jesus to conduct yourselves in a manner that is worthy of the gospel of Christ. You see, the truth is, there are some people in this world who are Christians and they can't handle the disappointments and the unmet expectations in life. And there are other Christians in the world who can't handle success in this life. They can't handle the bad, and other people, they cannot handle the good. And what that means is that you cannot go through life reacting to your circumstances. Instead, you have to react to Jesus, and you have to live all of life being true to who He called you and created you to be when you started a relationship with Him. God's expectations of you don't change just because your expectations aren't being met. You are responsible to live your life for Jesus. Paul says, whatever happens. But let me tell you something right now. That is not the way that most Christians live their life. In fact, let me show you how most Christians live their life. Now, maybe a lot of you have seen this illustration at some point in your life, but this is you and maybe somebody else that you know. I'm not going to say it's a husband and a wife, even though they're pink and blue beads, but let's just say that you're kind of going through life and everything is going great and everybody's happy and jolly and full of joy. But then you have an encounter with someone, and when you have this encounter with them and they don't live up to one of your expectations, what happens is there's a collision. And when there's this collision, all kinds of stuff starts to spill out of you. You don't have an expectation met. And so all of the sudden, I just broke it. Jeremy didn't think I could break it, but I just broke it. All of the sudden, right, you have this moment and frustration comes out of you. And anger starts to come out of you. And a tone starts to come out of you. And words are coming out of you. And actions are coming out of you. And you're sitting there, and as a follower of Jesus Christ, you feel bad about what you just said or what you just did. But you're defending yourself because you're prideful. And I do it too. And so what happens is we end up saying things, well, I wouldn't act that way if they would just do what they said they're going to do. Well, I wouldn't have to yell if the kids would just obey on the first time around. I wouldn't be so upset if my husband would just help me around the house a little bit, or if people would just do their job at work. I wouldn't be so frustrated all the time. But let me tell you something. That's not the real problem. But the problem is not what people do to you. The problem is with what's inside of you. That if that wasn't in there, that wouldn't spill out of there, but it is in there, and it's why every single person on the planet needs Jesus to change them from the inside out, right? That this is our life, what's inside of you and what's inside of me. It is ugly. It is sinful, and it is always living on the surface, ready to spill out in the moment that an expectation isn't met. The issue is not that life bumps into you, it's what's spilling out of you. And here's the truth. What spills out of us reveals what is really inside of us. And Paul knows it. And that's why Paul says that whatever happens in your life, good things or bad things, you are called by Jesus to live your life in a manner that is worthy of the gospel, because he knew that every collision in life, it is a test. That when you hit a bump in the road, that when an expectation in your life is not met, he knows you're going to respond in one of two ways. You are either going to respond in a way that brings honor to Christ, or you're going to respond in a way that dishonors Christ. You're going to respond in a way that says, man, I am worthy of the gospel, or you are going to conduct yourself in a manner that is unworthy of the gospel. Every unmet expectation in your life is a moment that will either make Jesus look great, or it will make Jesus look bad. Or let me say it like this. Every reaction is either an advertisement for Christ or an argument against him. And I just want to point out that when you react, when your expectations aren't met, that doesn't just say a lot about Jesus. It says a lot about you. It doesn't just change the way people see Jesus. It changes the way people see you. Think about some of the athletes who have lost endorsement deals because they acted or conducted themselves in a way that was deemed unworthy, right? Companies said to Ja Morant, you're not going to be flashing guns and gang symbols on social media if you're going to represent us. And so they canceled the contract and he lost the endorsement deals. That this is the same reason that Nike said, I got to distance ourselves from Tiger Woods when he was caught cheating on his wife. Lance Armstrong lost all kinds of deals because he was caught cheating and doping. Michael Vick lost his deals when he was caught up in dogfighting. And when they conducted themselves in that way, the company literally said to these men, you are not worthy to be associated with our brand. Now, let me just ask you, if companies care that much about how they're being represented by their people, shouldn't Jesus Christ care just as much about how he is being represented by the people who call themselves Christians in this world? See, the reason this is so important for the Christians in Philippi is because they had people in their lives that were bumping into them just like you do and just like I do. In fact, if you look back in verse 28, Paul said to them, he said, I don't want you to be frightened by your opponents. And then he goes on to tell them, what you're going through is the same thing I've been going through. And remember, Paul's in jail because of his faith in Jesus Christ. And so he's probably operating or riding under an awareness that people are trying to intimidate them to get them to shut their mouth about their relationship with Jesus. Now, I think it's really, really important to recognize that, yes, sometimes we get frustrated and other times we get frightened. In fact, you can look back all the way back to the first century, and you can see that these Christians were living in a context where there was this intense opposition to the person and the ways of Jesus Christ. And so the opposition that we are seeing in our world today to Jesus Christ, the opposition that we are seeing in our world today to Christian values, it's not new. And so Christians need to adjust their expectations and recognize that this very opposition has been around since the very beginning of time. And so instead of being frustrated, instead of being fearful and losing our joy, we maintain our joy. How? Because of what Paul said at the end of verse 28. He tells us the end of the story. He said, this is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. You know what he's saying? He's saying at the very end of time, God's going to deal with every person based on what they did with Jesus Christ. People who opposed Jesus, those in this world who opposed the people of Jesus and the ways of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, the Apostle Paul says that those people in the end, they will be destroyed. But that followers of Jesus, they will be saved, and that by God. And so when you know the end of the story, And you know that at the very end of your life or the very end of time, you are going to land in a perfect place in God's perfect timing, then yes, you can maintain your joy even when your expectations are not being met. And so let me just pause right there and ask you, which side are you on? And you need to be really honest with yourself, given what Paul is saying about people who will be saved and other people who will be destroyed. Are you on Team Jesus? Or do you find yourself disagreeing and opposing Team Jesus? Are you a person who says, I don't believe it. I don't like it. I don't follow it. And so you are in opposition to it. And as you think about your answer, I do want to remind you that there is no such thing as neutral ground when it comes to the person of Jesus Christ. Because there are a lot of Americans in the world today who are like, well, I'm not a follower of Jesus, but I'm not like against Jesus. Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 30. He said, whoever is not with me is against me. And so if you are on the fence about Jesus, I cannot encourage you enough to get off the fence and to get on the side of Jesus. Now, I hope that everyone in the room, everyone watching online is on Team Jesus. But I want to be very, very clear about what you should expect as a follower of Christ. Because there are a lot of people in the world who have made the mistake of believing that if I am a follower of Jesus, then God is going to bless my life. My life is going to be great, and all my problems in life are going to go away. And in that way, they have very unrealistic expectations that will never be met, and they are setting themselves up for disappointment that will steal their joy. Go back to what Paul said to these followers of Jesus in Philippi. Do not miss this, and do not choose to ignore this. This is the hard part of the passage, Philippians chapter 1. Verse 29, he said to Christians, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. And so if you're following along in your Philippians Bible journal, I want you to circle or underline the word suffer in verse 29. According to this verse, Paul is teaching that followers of Jesus are not just people who believe in Jesus, they are people who suffer for Jesus. In fact, in the NIV, which is the translation I'm reading from, Paul doesn't just use the word suffer, he also uses the word struggle. If you're following along in your Philippians Bible journal, I believe it's the English Standard Version. And so instead of using the word struggle, they actually use the word conflict, which is a very helpful word, because what Paul is really saying here is that you're not suffering because you were stupid. Have you ever seen someone who suffered because they were stupid? Yes, we all have. These are not people who are suffering because they shot themselves in the foot. These are people who are suffering in the world because they stand with Jesus in a world that is in opposition to Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, the question is not if you will suffer. The question is, when will you suffer? And how will you suffer? Will you suffer professionally because you live out your Christian values and you share your Christian faith in the workplace? Will you suffer relationally because you choose not to have sex before marriage? And so when the guys don't get what they want from you, they walk out on you and you suffer. Will you suffer financially because you choose to use your money in a way that advances the work of God and builds His kingdom? It's not just about building your own kingdom. Will you suffer socially, but because you will not participate in certain things that a lot of other people choose to participate in? Students, I want you to hear me say this. It's okay for you if you suffer for Jesus every Friday and Saturday night. It's good for you if you have to sit at home with your mother and your father on the weekend rather than spending all night violating your conscience and the Holy Spirit that is calling you to live more like Jesus. But the reason that most Christians aren't suffering is because they're compromising. Let me make something very clear to you. Adjust your expectations regarding what the Christian life is really like. Suffering is an unavoidable part of truly following Jesus. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if you're never suffering, you may not be even following. That should be a wake-up call. That if there's no head-on collision with the devil, you may be going in the same direction that he is. And so you need to understand that Paul says following Jesus is not just about believing in him. It really is about suffering with him. These people who would tell you that following Jesus is going to lead to a life of health and wealth and great prosperity, it's not true. And if you don't accept that, then when you come to a fork in the road where you have to choose between suffering for Jesus and finding joy apart from Jesus, you're going to struggle because naturally as human beings, we're going to want to take the path that will lead to joy and happiness. In fact, if you look in the New Testament, what you see in the New Testament is you see certain things in first century Christianity that, quite frankly, you never see in American Christianity. That the earliest followers of Jesus did not avoid suffering. They actually found joy in suffering for Jesus. Watch this, one example. Acts chapter 5, verses 40 and 41. We're told this about the early followers of Jesus. It says that they called the apostles in and they had them flogged. That means that they literally got whipped on their bare backs because they were followers of Jesus. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and they let them go. The apostles left the Sanhedrin, there it is, rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. And let me tell you something, they were not the only ones. The Apostle Paul, who wrote this very letter, he was in the same boat with them. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul is actually boasting extensively about all the ways in which he had suffered because of his commitment to Jesus Christ. In verses 23 to 28, he talks about being arrested, being beaten, and being shipwrecked. In the same set of verses, he talks about the fact that he was in danger in the city and in the country and on the river and out in the open sea. He was always moving about, looking for another people group to tell about Jesus and another city where he could plant another church. He says in the same passage that there were days when he didn't have enough food to eat and there were nights when he didn't have enough sleep. But through it all, what you see in Paul is that he was literally boasting about the fact that he suffered for the sake of Jesus. In James chapter 1, verse 2, James, the little brother of Jesus, said something very similar. He said, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." You see this theme over and over again in the earliest followers of Jesus in the first century, but you don't really see it in American Christianity in the 21st century. Instead of avoiding a life of suffering, these early followers of Jesus, they actually found joy in a life of suffering for Jesus. How in the world is that possible? I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If I were living in the first century and I saw Peter, James, and John skipping down the old dirt road happy because they just got beaten within an inch of their life because of their relationship with Jesus, I'm looking at those guys going, man, those guys ain't right. Like something is wrong. But the truth is, there's nothing wrong with them. But there is something wrong with us. They understood something that most of us don't understand. As followers of Jesus, the kingdom is not here, it's there. The kingdom is not now, it's later. The joy we live for and long for, it is not temporary joy. It is an eternal kind of joy. And when you walk into his kingdom, as a follower of Jesus who sacrificed for Jesus and even suffered for Jesus, then King Jesus will honor you when you come into his kingdom. Every expectation that you've ever had of God, it will not only be met, but every expectation you've had of God on that day, it will exceed all of your expectations. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, Isaiah 64, verse 4, both Old Testament and New Testament tell us the same thing. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind can conceive what God has prepared for those who love him. Let me tell you something. Joy is not found in the absence of problems. Joy is found in the promises of God. Joy is not found in the absence of problems. Joy is found in the presence of Jesus. And I don't know about you, but that is something that I need to hear. I live my life, and quite frankly, I do make some sacrifices for Jesus. I do suffer in some small ways for Jesus. But the truth is, I'm not always happy about it. In fact, if I'm really honest with you, there are a lot of times when I actually resent it. And so because of that, I don't get to experience the same kind of joy that Paul and other people experience, because most of the times I'm focused on what I'm missing out on now rather than what I'll be rewarded with later. And in that way, I need to adjust my expectations. And so I want to end by reading that passage to you one more time. Because what I really want you to believe is that following Jesus and sacrificing for Jesus and even suffering for Jesus is totally worth it, because no eye has seen and no ear has ever heard and no mind can possibly conceive all of the great things that God has prepared in eternity for those who love him. It takes faith to believe that. And it takes even more faith to pursue that. But that is where ultimate joy is found. Let's pray together. God, we thank you so much for this passage that pushes us down another path of joy that most of us have never even been on. God, we do everything we can to avoid suffering. And we especially do everything we can to avoid suffering for Jesus. That far too many Christians are blending in rather than standing out. We are people who have become friends with the world, and in the process, as Scripture says and warns, that when we become friends with the world, we become enemies of God. And God, we know there's no joy in that life. And while, God, I know this teaching is a hard teaching, I pray, God, that it would just resonate with people. Pray, God, that you might open our eyes to adjust our expectations, and that it would be an adjustment that extends way beyond ice cream and oil changes and traffic lights, but that we would start to have expectations about what the Christian life is really about. God, I pray for your people that they would be willing to make sacrifices for Jesus, whatever that may look like. God, I pray for your people that they might be willing to suffer for Jesus, whatever that may look like. And I pray, God, that you would produce in them the kind of joy that they long for and that they crave. God, for those who do not yet have a relationship with Jesus, I pray that maybe somehow, some way you could use this message that may sound so strange to them to actually draw them into a relationship with yourself through your Son, Jesus Christ. Would you start that great work in their life? And I pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.